The 26th of June, 1973. The Lakeside Hotel, Canberra. Federal Minister Kep Enderby pulls a cover off a four-door sedan. The slogan above the stage reads, "Anything but average." The press releases call it the first car designed and built entirely in Australia by a wholly Australian engineering team. It isn't. It is a British company. But the engineers are Australian. The factory is in Sydney. And the dream is real. This is the Leyland P76. It will win Wheels Car of the Year. It will win a Sicilian rally stage outright. And it will be killed in 16 months by a London boardroom that named it after the army serial number of a British peer. 43 years, almost to the day, after the last P76 rolled out of Sydney, the last Australian-made car rolled off an assembly line in Melbourne. This is the story of how the dream of an Australian car died, twice. Chapter 1. The Dream of an Australian Car. The 29th of November 1948, Fisherman's Bend, Melbourne. Prime Minister Ben Chifley pulled the cover off a four-door sedan and said three words that became national mythology. "She's a beauty." The car was the Holden 48-215. Australia's first wholly Australian-made passenger car. Chifley's Labor government had personally challenged industry to build one in 1944 as a pillar of post-war reconstruction, and because, in his own words, a local car industry would make Australia more secure in the event of another war. 18,000 Australians had placed deposits before the car had ever been launched. 120,402 Holdens were built between 1948 and 1953. By 1958, Holden had 43% of the Australian market. Australia believed. That was the moment the country decided it could build its own car. The full-size sedan, designed for Australian roads and Australian distances by Australian engineers on Australian soil, even if the badge on the bonnet belonged to General Motors of Detroit, the British noticed. In 1954, three British companies, Austin Australia, Nuffield Australia and Fisher and Ludlow, merged into the British Motor Corporation of Australia. The new BMC inherited a Sydney plant that Lord Nuffield, William Morris, the Oxford industrialist who had built the Morris Motor Company into the largest car maker in Britain, had personally bought in 1946. The site was the former Victoria Park racecourse at Zetland, on the southern edge of the city, a racecourse drained from a Waterloo swamp in 1908. A racecourse the Australian Army had used during the Second World War. After the war, the racecourse reverted to a horse training track. Then Nuffield's Australian representative walked the site in 1946, took the measure of the 110 acres and bought it. The first stage of the new factory opened in 1950. Within 4 years, it was building Morris miners for the New South Wales market, with the Mini, the Moke and the Marina. To follow in the decades after, 52 to 112 Joynton Avenue, Zetland, 893 to 931 South Dowling Street, Waterloo, 65.5 acres of inner Sydney industrial land, 20 minutes from the Harbour Bridge. By 1973, BMC's Australian successor would employ nearly 6,000 people across the country. The Zetland floor alone employed up to 7,000 at its peak, mostly migrants speaking 35 languages. Between 1950 and 1975, 50,000 Australians collectively spent 130,000 years building motor cars at Victoria Park. The British operation was second only to Holden, by ambition, if not by sales. And in 1968, in London, 2 boardrooms shook hands. Chapter 2. The Englishman at the Door. January 1968. London. British Motor Holdings, which had absorbed BMC 2 years earlier, merged with Leyland Motors. The new entity was named the British Leyland Motor Corporation, BLMC. The British government had actively encouraged the merger. The Australian operation was inherited as collateral. In March 1972, The Sydney arm was renamed Leyland Motor Corporation of Australia Limited. In March 1973, every Morris badge, every Austin badge, every BMC badge on every Australian-built passenger car was replaced by the single word Leyland. Australia became the only country in the world to badge passenger cars as Leyland. The figurehead in London was Lord Donald Stokes, chairman of British Leyland, peer of the realm, close personal friend of British Prime Minister Harold Wilson. The Lord of Leyland. His deputy was a finance man called John Barber. Stokes's view of the Australian project, by every account in the documented record, was that it was a colonial expense to be controlled. The Australian engineer who refused to listen was David Beach. Beach was Director of Development and Production at Leyland Australia. He had a plan, a full-size Australian sedan, designed in Sydney from a clean sheet, built on the Zetland line, sold across the country. Something to take on the Falcon and the Kingswood, not pick at their edges with the Mini and the Marina. Beach, in his own words to Motor Magazine in 1973. The Australians like to change their cars often. We found we could sell a bloke 2 1100s, even 3, but there was no way in the world we could sell him 4. We decided that if we were to take a fair profitable share of the market, we needed to design and make our own cars. He asked London for 30 million Australian dollars to do it. London gave him 21. At the same time, Chrysler Australia had a similar budget just for engine development of its Hemi 6. Leyland Australia had to design an entire full-size car from a clean sheet on what Chrysler was spending on a single engine. Sources tied to the British Leyland archives state that the UK parent made several attempts to cancel the P76 project outright across the development years. David Beach, according to those same sources, fought hard to keep it alive, and at times simply ignored London to get things done. The UK boardroom insisted the new car carry over as much hardware as possible from Rover and Triumph parts bins. The Rover-derived V8, the SD1-related componentry, the British supply contracts. Beach accepted the constraints and pushed on. David Beach said yes anyway, and one day in late 1969, the project got its code name. Chapter 3, Project 76. This chapter requires a confession. The most told story about the Leyland P76 is also the story this script cannot fully verify, the name itself. Sources tied to British Leyland's history report Lord Stokes turning to a BMCA manager named Roger Foy and saying, "Why don't you call it something like P76? The most cited version holds that P76 were the first 3 characters of Stokes's British Army service number. Stokes is reported by AR Online to have repeated the story to its interviewer to his face. We cannot find a British Leyland board minute confirming it. We can find Stokes's recorded retelling. We tell you this version because it is the version Stokes himself confirmed. The car that would be remembered as Australia's most ambitious motoring failure was named after the Army serial number of an English peer." The Australian engineers said yes. By 1972, the Zetland unit plant floor was already a crossroads of Australian migration. 5,000 workers at any one time, 35 languages. Among them, a Greek migrant from Alexandria, Egypt. His name was Spiro Aretoulis, born the 8th of January 1937. He had walked through the Zetland gates on the 5th of November 1956 as a newly arrived assembler on the Austin A55 rear axle line. By 1972, he was quality control foreman of the unit plant. 16 years on the floor. He had built Morris Minors and Mini Mokes and Marinas, and now the rumours were thick on the line. A big car, a full-size sedan, designed in Australia. The Italians were coming. A second confession. Aretoulis' testimony survives in the BMC Leyland Australia Heritage Group's oral history program, recorded by interviewer Jennifer Cornwall on the 19th of August, 2002. The master tapes are at the State Library of New South Wales. The detail in this script is drawn from the Heritage Group's typed tape log, which paraphrases his account. Where you hear him in this video, you are hearing the log writer's summary, not the man's voice. The Italian was Giovanni Michelotti, born Turin, 1921. The freelance master who had shaped Triumphs, BMWs and Ferraris. He flew to Sydney. The story Beach and his team would tell for the rest of their lives was that Michelotti finalised the P76's wedge shape in a single week. A third confession. The basic shape was substantially in-house Leyland Australia work. Beach restyled the front and rear. A body engineer enlarged the boot. Michelotti's contribution was real. The legend was always larger. The engineering ambition was not legend. It was real, and it was advanced. A 111-inch wheelbase, 4.88 metres long, designed for Australian roads and Australian heat. The first Australian production car with side impact intrusion beams, bonded windscreen, rack and pinion steering, McPherson strut front suspension, power front disc brakes standard, concealed wipers, a body of only 215 pressings, just 5 more than a Mini. And under the bonnet, a 4.4-litre all-alloy V8, derived from the ex-Buick Rover unit, stroked to 4.4 litres for Australian use. 192 horsepower, 230 kilograms, 500 pounds, lighter than every other V8 sold in this country. The first all-alloy engine ever fitted to an Australian-built car. And on the 26th of June, 1973, in Canberra, Federal Minister Kep Enderby pulled the cover off. Chapter 4. The boot. Big enough for a 44-gallon drum. The 26th of June, 1973. The Lakeside Hotel, Canberra. The press gallery was packed. Federal Minister Kep Enderby was there. The Leyland Australia executive team was there. The Sydney motoring press was there. The wedge-shaped sedan stood on a low plinth under hot lights. A photographer's flashbulb went off every 15 seconds. 3 variants on the showroom floor. Deluxe, Super, Executive, 2 engines. The 2.6-litre overhead cam 6, derived from the Austin Kimberley and Tasman unit, and now enlarged for the bigger car. Or the 4.4-litre V8, and a single advertising boast that would outlive the car itself. The boot of a P76 would swallow a 44-gallon drum with the lid closed. 35 cubic feet. Bigger than the Falcon's boot. Bigger than the Kingswood's boot. Big enough for the Australian Outback, the road train hauler's spare, the cattle station owner's groceries for a fortnight. The drum in the boot demonstration became the campaign's anchor image. Marketing Director John Kay's department in Sydney rolled out print, dealer point of sale, and a national television campaign. The slogan was 3 words. Anything but average. The Australian dream made metal. A full-size sedan designed by Australians at Zetland, built by Australians at Zetland, sold by Australian dealers from Cairns to Perth, with a Rover-derived V8 lighter than anything Holden or Ford could put on the road. Sydney dealers were ordering by the dozen. Motoring journalists were invited to drive convoys from the Canberra launch back up to Sydney along the Hume Highway. The Federal Minister pulled the cover off. The press release used the word revolutionary. And every documented record from the period agrees on the central fact. This was a good idea. The engineering was advanced. The boot really did fit the drum. The V8 really was 500 pounds lighter than its rivals. The ride drew genuine praise from contemporary road testers. The dream wasn't fake. The dream was real. Then a wheels journalist got behind the wheel of a press car parked at the launch hotel. He noticed the water on the floor. He looked at the windscreen seal. He looked at the door fit. He drove the car. He wrote his notes. Less than 4 months after launch, on the 17th of October 1973, the oil embargo was announced. Chapter 5. The Rectification Centre, the 17th of October 1973. Kuwait City. The Organisation of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries announced an embargo against nations that had supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Within weeks, the world's oil price had quadrupled. Petrol stations queued for blocks across the United States, Britain and Europe. Demand for large V8 sedans collapsed worldwide. Australia's effect was partly perception. Local oil production cushioned the pump price through 1974. But the perception was enough. The car of the season was suddenly the wrong shape and the wrong appetite. And then the quality disasters arrived. Windscreens were bonded on only 3 sides. Water poured in. The first rain after delivery, owners would lift the carpet and pour the water out. Doors did not fit their apertures. Air sealing failed. Dust-filled cabins on country runs from Sydney to Bathurst, from Melbourne to Bendigo. A-pillars shrunk toward the body because pressed steel's jig tooling was substandard. Windscreens cracked from the stress within months of delivery. Carpets smouldered because the exhaust ran too close to the floor pan and the insulation was too thin. V8 engines overheated and consumed oil at rates the warranty was never priced for. Spark plugs ran too cool. Piston rings failed. There were documented reports of wheels falling off in service. Door windows falling out at speed. Leyland Australia's response was unprecedented in the Australian car industry. The company built a rectification centre inside the Zetland factory, a $2 million facility, around 60 staff. One job to rework completed P76s before they could be delivered to dealers. Read that again. Leyland Australia built a building inside its own factory to fix the cars its own factory had just built. Ian Thomas was Leyland State Service Manager for Victoria and Tasmania. His own words on the door seal failures. There was no ledge along the sill for the door to seat against, so most days I'd arrive at my office at Airport West and there'd be a bunch of owners waiting. Spiro Aretoulis was quality control foreman of the unit plant by then. Per the Heritage Group's paraphrased oral history log, he recalled that the engine was, in his words, really good. The body side, he said, had many problems, especially door seal water leaks. The engineering was sound. The execution wasn't. The dream and the reality. Split apart on the Zetland line in the second half of 1973. If you want to keep these memories alive, click the link below in the description and reserve a copy of the book. Chapter 6. Car of the Year, January 1974. The Sydney offices of Wheels magazine. Wheels was Australia's most authoritative motoring publication. Its Car of the Year award had been running since 1963. The judges had withheld the award entirely in 1972. No car that year had been judged worthy. In January 1974, Wheels announced the 1973 Car of the Year. The Leyland P76 V8. Read that again. The P76. The car with water in its carpets. The car with doors that fell out. The car with windows that fell out. The car with wheels that fell off. The car with smouldering insulation and a $2 million rectification centre running double shifts inside the factory that built it. The Car of the Year. The official citation reproduced in the museum record. It sets new standards for medium-sized local cars in its ride. Handling and road-holding compromise, it has fine brakes, is comfortable, very roomy, practical and, with the all-important V8 engine, has excellent performance and superior fuel consumption, compared to the V8 opposition and the larger competitive sixes. And the totally new Leyland sedan emerged as a dynamic and remarkably fine motorcar, surely destined to push Leyland up the ladder, both in Australia and in export markets. Here is the surgical detail. the award was for the V8 only, not the 2.6-litre 6. Wheels would later confirm it had given the award solely to the V8. Leyland Australia advertised the entire range as Car of the Year. The magazine changed its Car of the Year rules afterward because of what Leyland had done with the citation. From 1974, the award was open to imports. The Leyland P76 broke the rulebook before it broke its own. Leyland Australia would build only 18,007 P76s in total. The award was for the V8. Leyland advertised all 18,007 as Car of the Year anyway. The Powerhouse Museum in Sydney holds one of those cars today, an Aspen Green V8. Build date the 21st of May, 1974. Engine number 076D4SM4416461. Original owner Jack Lawler, the Leyland dealer in Condobolin, New South Wales. The Powerhouse purchased it at auction in Condobolin in 1992. The rear window still carries a period sticker, "I'm driving the Car of the Year." But on the same Zetland floor where Wheels had said the future of Australian motoring was being built, water was pooling in boots. The rectification centre was running double shifts. Sales were softening. Dealers were cancelling orders. And in Britain, a 31-year-old executive was already booking a flight to Sydney. His name was David Abell, and he had been sent to kill the car. Chapter 7. The Englishman Who Came to Kill It. Early 1974. Sydney, David Abell. 31 years old, British. Parachuted into Leyland Australia to succeed Managing Director Peter North. Abell had not designed the P76. Abell had not built the P76. Abell had not lived a single day at the Zetland plant. He arrived with one quote, verbatim, to the Australian press shortly after taking the chair. "I always thought we should never have built the P76. 10 words, 1 sentence. The first thing the new managing director of Leyland Australia told the country was that he had always believed the car should never have been built. Not a recovery plan, not a turnaround memo, a repudiation. Read that again. By mid-1974, the company dominoes fell fast. David Beach, the father of the P76, the engineer who had fought London for $30 million and accepted $21 million, resigned. Peter North resigned. Component supplier strikes hit the production line, accompanied by persistent allegations that Leyland's Big Three rivals were pressuring the suppliers to starve Zetland of parts. Those allegations were never proven. Dealer cancellations multiplied. Sales slumped. The Whitlam government's 25% tariff cut in 1973 had complicated the trade picture. The restoration of the 45% tariff in 1974 came too late. And in London, the British Leyland Motor Corporation was running out of money. The same year the P76 was supposed to save Leyland Australia, the parent company was on the brink of collapse. By December 1974, the British government would be drafting an emergency rescue. In January 1975, the Wilson Labor government commissioned the Ryder inquiry into British Leyland's collapse. On the 26th of March 1975, Sir Don Ryder delivered his report to Industry Minister Tony Benn. On the 24th of April 1975, Prime Minister Harold Wilson, Lord Stokes's close personal friend, announced the government would accept the report. On the 27th of June 1975, the British Leyland Motor Corporation ceased to exist as an independent company and became British Leyland Limited, under majority government ownership. Effective nationalisation. The UK parent was being rescued by the British state. The honest connection. Most enthusiasts miss it. The Australian operation wasn't shut because the P76 itself was losing money. Peter North, before resigning, was on the record stating the P76 had become cash flow neutral by early 1974. The Australian operation was shut because London needed to stop bleeding everywhere at once. Spain, Italy, South Africa. Leyland's overseas plants were all closed in the same global retrenchment. The Australian dream died in a London boardroom that had never seen Zetland. In October 1974, the announcement came. Chapter 8, November 1974. The radio. October 1974. The closure was announced. The Zetland plant would close. The last P76s would be plated in November. David Abell told the press 2,600 workers would lose their jobs. By mid-1975, the actual count exceeded 5,200. Twice what he had said. The Heritage Group's oral history log records the moment Spiro Aretoulis learned the news. He was driving to work. He heard about the closure of Zetland on the car radio. He had been on the floor for 18 years. He heard it on a Sydney AM frequency on the way in. The detail is documented. The dialogue is not. The log records that, in the last days, sackings were sudden and that workers were escorted off the premises. The fire sale followed. The Australian government paid approximately $25 million for the factory and the unsold cars. UTS academic David Waller's analysis records, in his own words, 800 cars were forced to be sold at bottom-of-the-market prices. Leyland, Australia, by Waller's published figure, reported a loss of over $50 million on the program. Many of the unsold P76s ended up as state and local council transport. The car that was meant to outsell the Falcon ended up doing service rounds in suburban Sydney. The Force 7 Coupe, Leyland Australia's secret weapon, the V8 fastback hatchback designed to challenge the Monaro, the Charger and the Falcon hardtop, never went on sale. Around 56 were built. Most were crushed in the factory yard. 8 were auctioned in September 1975, fetching under $10,000 each against the $30,000 to $40,000 Leyland Australia had projected. One was shipped to Britain for Lord Stokes himself, painted Omega Navy with white trim. The Powerhouse Museum holds another. The Petty family of Perth bought one at the September 75 auction and named it home on the orange. It survives. So do roughly 9 others, out of 56. The number of Targa Florio editions built is contested. 300, 480, 500 or 900, depending on the source. We say a few hundred. 18,007 P76s in total. 18 months of production. 16 months from public launch to the day the company that built the car was killed by its parent in London. And then the second twist arrived. Because while Sydney was closing, in Sicily, a P76 was winning. Chapter 9. The Targa Florio, the 1974 UDT World Cup Rally, London to Munich. 19,000 kilometres across France, Spain, the Sahara, Sicily, Greece, Turkey, Yugoslavia. The event was staged to coincide with the Football World Cup of the same year. Around 70 international entries at the start, 19 finishes. One of those finishes was a near-standard Leyland P76 Executive V8. 4-speed manual gearbox, production suspension, sponsored by Faberge's Brute 33 aftershave brand and nicknamed Big Brute. Driven by Australian motoring journalist Evan Green and navigator John Bryson. On the 72-kilometre-old Targa Florio circuit in Sicily, the legendary mountain road race course used by Porsche, Ferrari and Alfa Romeo for decades, Green and Bryson won the special stage outright. Outright. Against Works, Citroëns. Against Works, Mercedes. Against factory teams from across Europe with budgets and backup that Leyland Australia could not even have priced. The only Australian-made car in the event won a Sicilian rally stage outright. They finished 13th overall, a broken strut on the road to Tamanrasset in the Sahara had cost a higher placing. They were one of just 19 cars to finish out of around 70 starters. By the time Green and Bryson drove the big brute home to Sydney along the London-Sydney marathon route, Leyland Australia was dead. Read that again. The Zetland factory was padlocked. A P76 won an outright rally stage in Sicily, both in 1974, both the same car. The car that broke Australia's car-making belief was, in Europe, beating the world. The dream wasn't broken because the car couldn't perform. The dream was broken because the boardroom in London never gave it the chance. The limited edition Targa Florio P76 was released to commemorate the win. A few hundred units, V8 only. Automatic, power steering, limited slip differential, side stripes, 3 colours, Omega Navy, Aspen Green, Nutmeg. Most never sold. And then they came for the rest. Chapter 10. The 4 Dominoes. The P76 didn't close Holden's factory the day it died. It didn't close Ford's. It didn't close Mitsubishi's or Toyota's. What it killed was harder to repair. It killed the belief that Australia could design and build its own full-size car from a clean sheet. From November 1974 onwards, every passenger car built in this country was built by a foreign-owned company, propped up by Australian government industry assistance, waiting for the day the parent boardroom did the maths and switched off the lights. It took 43 years. Domino 1, Mitsubishi, Tonsley Park, Adelaide, same plant Chrysler Australia had built in October 1964. The same Tonsley Park plant the channel covered in our Chrysler Australia episode. Mitsubishi took it over from Chrysler in 1980 for 79.4 million Australian dollars. They built the Sigma, then the Magna, then the 380. On the 5th of February 2008, Mitsubishi Australia President Rob McInerney stood in the Tonsley Park canteen at 3:45 in the afternoon and told 1,200 workers the plant was closing. The Mitsubishi board in Tokyo had approved the decision the day before. McInerney, in his own words, called it heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. Cumulative losses over $1.5 billion. The last Mitsubishi 380 came off the Tonsley line on the 27th of March 2008. A paint shop worker named Beck Durbidge, 30 years old, 12 years on the line, sprayed the last body in platinum silver. Identical twins Carol Rollins and Anne Regnier worked their final shift alongside her. Peter Angrave, apprentice to senior management, 38 years at Tonsley, said it plainly. The company had given them an education, like a big university. The first modern domino had fallen. Domino 2, Ford, Broadmeadows and Geelong, Victoria. The 23rd of May 2013. Ford Australia President Bob Graziano announced the closure of all Australian Ford manufacturing. His own words, "Our costs are double that of Europe and nearly 4 times Ford in Asia." The business case simply did not stack up. The decision was made in Detroit, Michigan, under Ford's global One Ford plan. The Falcon, the Australian car since the 28th of June 1960, would die. On the 26th of September 2016, Geelong built the last Australian Ford engine. On the 7th of October 2016, the last Falcon, a blue XR6, rolled off the Broadmeadows line. 88 years of Ford manufacturing in Australia. AMWU delegates Paul Boulos and Stuart Harris said it plainly. Today felt like a family breakup. Domino 3, Holden, Elizabeth, Adelaide. The 10th of December 2013, the call was made overnight in Detroit. The 11th of December in Adelaide, Holden chairman Mike Devereaux announced what General Motors had decided. His own words. "Make no mistake, we have looked at every possible option to build our next generation cars here. But no matter which way you cut the numbers, The long-term business case to make and assemble cars in this country is simply not viable. The decision is irreversible. Mary Barra became GM's CEO in Detroit that same week. On the 20th of October 2017, the last Australian-made Holden Commodore, a VFII, rolled off the Elizabeth line. As we covered in our Holden Elizabeth episode, 7.7 million Holdens built in total. An American boardroom switched off Australia's most loved car, Domino 4, Toyota, Altona, Victoria. The 10th of February 2014. Toyota's global president, Akio Toyoda, flew to Altona to deliver the news in person. He was the only one of the 4 parent CEOs to face the Australian workforce himself. On the 3rd of October 2017, the last Toyota Camry came off the Altona line. 2,168,104 Toyotas built in Australia since 1963. This, not the Holden Commodore 17 days later, was the last mass-produced car ever built in Australia. 43 years, almost to the day earlier, the last P76 had been plated at Zetland. Read the numbers: 2.1 million Camrys, 7.7 million Holdens, 18,007 P76. The one that tried hardest to be Australian was the first to die. 4 foreign parents, 4 boardrooms overseas, 4 switches flicked off. The death the P76 began was finished by foreign hands. And on the 3rd of October 2017, the country that had built its own car in 1948 stopped building cars at all. Chapter 11. The boot that closes on nothing. What remains of Leyland Australia in 2026 is a small list. A bronze historic engineering marker, installed by the Institution of Engineers Australia at Randwick Racecourse in June 2000. The Aspen Green P76 Super V8 at the Powerhouse Museum, Ultimo, with the "I'm driving the car of the year" sticker still on the back window. A surviving 4.7 coupe at the National Motor Museum, Birdwood, South Australia. Roughly 9 other 4.7s in private hands, the streets of the Victoria Park residential development at Zetland, named after the cars that were built there. None of it adds up to a factory. Stand at the corner of Joynton Avenue and South Dowling Street, Zetland, Sydney, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in late 2026. There is no factory. The Victoria Park residential development covers the site now. Apartments, parks, a community library restored from the original 1908 Victoria Park Racecourse Totalisator building, the tote that came before the factory. The 278-hectare Green Square renewal has erased the Zetland that built the Mini, the Moke, the Marina, and the dream of an Australian Leyland. This is not the Australian Technology Park redevelopment at South Everleigh. That is a different former industrial site. Zetland became Green Square. Lord Donald Stokes died in 2008, still a peer of the realm, still in the House of Lords. No banning order, no revocation. The 4.7 coupe he took home for himself in 1974, painted Omega Navy, the Leyland Australia colour, was later sold to a New Zealand collector. It is one of the surviving 10. Lesson 1. Belief is the first thing that dies. The P76 didn't shut Holden. It didn't shut Ford. It didn't shut Mitsubishi or Toyota. It killed something harder to rebuild. It killed the belief that Australia could design and build a full-size car from a clean sheet. From November 1974 onwards, every car built in this country was built on borrowed conviction, propped by tariff, propped by industry assistance, propped by the hope that someone in Tokyo, Detroit, or Dearborn wouldn't notice. The day belief dies, the calendar starts on the rest. Lesson 2. The boardroom. That didn't build it makes the call. Lord Donald Stokes named the P76. He killed it from a London office that had never seen Zetland. Rob McIntyre read the Tonsley script from a Tokyo recommendation. Bob Graziano, announced Detroit's decision. Mike Devereaux delivered General Motors' verdict. Akio Toyoda was the only one of the four who came in person. When the boardroom is overseas, the factory floor learns the news second. Spiro Aretoulis heard about Zetland on the car radio. 43 years later, 2,500 workers at Altona learned theirs the same way. Lesson 3. Once you sell the dream, you sell the country's belief in itself. Australia built its own car in 1948 because Ben Chifley believed it had to. 3 decades later, the British operation that tried to match him was abandoned by a London boardroom that had never seen the Tanami. 43 years after that, an American boardroom shut down the car Chifley unveiled. And on the 3rd of October 2017, in Altona, a Japanese boardroom switched off the last mass-produced Australian car. We had one shot at building our own car. We blew it so badly we never believed in ourselves again. November 1948. Fisherman's Bend. Ben Chifley pulls the cover off a Holden 48-215, June 1973. Canberra. Kep Enderby pulls the cover off a Leyland P76, October 1974. Sydney. Zetland closes, October 2017. Melbourne. Toyota closes Altona, the last Australian car. 69 years, one country, no cars. Lift the boot of the Powerhouse Museum's P76, 35 cubic feet, big enough for a 44-gallon drum with the lid closed. The boast was real. The boot was real. The drum was never delivered. You will not hear a stamping press at Altona. You will not hear a paint booth at Elizabeth. You will not hear an exhaust note at Broadmeadows. You will not hear the slow grinding heartbeat of an Australian car-making line anywhere on the continent. The Leyland badge is gone. The Mack Bulldog still barks in Brisbane, in Swedish. The Holden Lion no longer roars. The Falcon's wings are folded. The Camry was the last word in a language that has no more speakers. This is not just the story of Leyland and the P76. It is the story of what happens when a country lets a boardroom in another country decide its dream was always a bad idea. But for 16 months, in a Sydney suburb called Zetland, in the hands of an Australian engineer named David Beach, a Greek migrant named Spiro Aretoulis, and 5,000 workers speaking 35 languages, the dream was real. The boot still closes. There is nothing inside it.